in 2013 that the name Coffee Party really didn't tell people who we really were or what we meant. So we had a poll and asked all of our email members to suggest a new title, what words resonated with them. And so now we're a common ground for Texans. And so it's more indicative of the kinds of things that we try to do. So we meet once a month. The first Saturday of the month we meet here at Old Quarry Library. And there are two areas that we're particularly interested in. One is civil discourse and the other is civic engagement. And so we have asked a bunch of folks to meet with us today to talk a little bit about young folks and why young folks aren't voting at the same rate as older folks are. But I also wanted I'm an election judge, and so I feel compelled to make sure that you've got information that you need about voting. If you have not voted already, November 6th is your last opportunity to vote. And you know that lines tend to be quite long for elections, and they seem to be longer for this midterm election than they have been in previous midterms. So I wanted to bring to your attention that there is a website that's called votetravis.com, and on that website there is a part of that website that will tell you where there is potentially where there's a line and potentially where there is not a line. So there is a green light, a yellow light, and a red light for each polling location. And what happens is that I'm an election judge, and every 30 minutes or so I'm asked how many people are in line, and I have to tell central location how many are in line. That's where that map comes from. It doesn't mean that half an hour from now the line is going to be the same as it was, but it does give you some indication of the flow of people at a particular polling place. So if you know folks who have planned to vote on November 6th, make sure that they know about votetravis.com because it's really, really helpful. Do make sure that people do go vote. I have some cards from the League of Women Voters in the back that contract with folks to make sure that they vote, in the sense that if someone is willing to say where and when they will vote, it's more likely that they will. So we're pushing that as much as we possibly can. And so I like to vote, and I like to vote all the time. And I thought, what I would do, I'm going to be an election judge. I'm going to be sitting at a table from 7 a.m. probably till 8 p.m., even though polls close at 7 p.m. And why don't I just vote on election day? And I said, yeah, for a change, I'm going to vote early, get it out of the way. So I have voted, and it's wonderful. So today, though, is a conversation about young folks. And so we've asked a bunch of folks to join us today, and Grant is on his way. But let me introduce them to you quickly. One is Mike Ignikowski is our moderator for today, and we've asked him to begin a conversation with everyone. And so Connor Bills and Ben Rogers are both seniors, I think, at Anderson High School, and Amy Jaggers is the chair of the history department at Anderson High School. And then we have Zachary Price, who is at UT Austin with a group called Texas Votes. And Grant Lovelace, as I said, is on his way and is an ACC student. And so we sort of have a broad, definite group of students. And I'm defining a young person as somebody who's 18 to 24. So that's pretty young for me. Way beyond that. However, so let me turn it over to Mike and see what happens with this conversation. And Grant just came in. Thanks, Grant.
Thanks, Joanne. So Tuesday is the big exciting day. I suspect most of the audience members are very politically active and have either already voted or plan to vote. Judging by the amount of gray hair, they've probably voted many, many times already in their life. And that's great. I voted early. The crowd was so big they ran out of the I voted bumper stickers, so I didn't get one. The registration is up a lot. Early voting is up a lot. Young folks, they define it as 18 to 35, are now the largest voting bloc in Travis County. That's really good. People predict record turnouts of young people, but they often predict that, and they often end up disappointed. In midterm elections, typically you get 40 to 50% of people voting. For younger folks in their 30s, it's often like 30% of people voting. And people who are actively engaged in politics are dumbfounded by this. Why is there such low turnout here? So that's going to be our topic of discussion today. It's going to be an informal set of questions and answers, trying to have a discussion. I'll ask people specific questions, but the rest of the panel can also respond and have a discussion here. We'll do that for a while, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. But we do want to hear what the panel have to say. And we have high school teachers, high school students, college students. So that's going to be a good mix, and I'd like to get real opinions of what folks think about. So we'll start off with Amy Jaggers, who is the official chair of the history department at Anderson High School. And I'd like you to just fill us in about what actually is being taught. Since civics classes are not necessarily a thing anymore, what do we teach students about their roles and participation in a democratic government, about voting process, and what do you see as the students' attitudes towards this?
Okay, I teach currently at Anderson. I also taught at Murchison Middle School here in the area, so I'm aware of what they teach for 7th and 8th graders as well as for high school students. And according to our Texas TEKS, they actually start them in 8th grade with a civics lesson that's incorporated into the U.S. history content that they're studying in 8th grade, because it is early American history, so they're focusing on, you know, the foundations of government, and along with that comes an early civics lesson. What does voting look like? How do you engage? How do you, as a student or as a young person, get involved in the democratic process? And then as they get up into high school, we actually have a state law that after 9/11 that came about. It's called Celebrate Freedom Week, and that happens in September. And with that comes a discussion of the Constitution along with the Declaration of Independence. In 12th grade, the students do take a semester-long government course, which focuses all semester on the founding of the Constitution, where the early principles of government come from, and then especially in election years, they spend a big chunk of time before the election doing a whole lesson, a lot of lessons about civic engagement. I taught government for 2 years, and so I know that's something that we really stressed in the government classes. I actually taught during the last election, so we spent a lot of time talking about all the different candidates, especially as we went up into the primaries, and we worked hard on informing all the students of who all the Republican and Democratic candidates were going to be, and help them to make informed decisions about who they were interested in. And then on our campus as well, there was a big push for social studies teachers to become deputy registrars. And at Anderson, we actually had someone come out and register all of us so that we could help register students on campus. This year we had some parents in the community who were interested in coming up and helping us. And so on September 25th, the National Student Registration Day, we actually set up a table in Anderson in our social studies hallway, and we registered about 40 students to vote. The challenge with high school students, though, is because that 18-year cutoff, you don't catch a lot of them in the fall. You catch much more of them in the spring. So that early push for voting, they're all really excited because we've talked about it so much, but they don't really get to do that until, after their 18th birthday. So we have some, like the individuals here who have gotten to vote because they have early birthdays, whereas the majority of the students haven't turned 18 yet. So that's our biggest struggle. But AISD as well has a big push to register students to vote. I know last year at AISD's, all of their graduations, they had voter registration set up outside of the Frank Irwin Center, so as students left, they could register to vote. I know our social studies department downtown actually is working on an initiative to target birthdays of students and send out to teachers to let them know whose birthdays are coming up and who we can give those voter registration mail-in cards to, because they provide those to teachers as well, and that's an easy way for teachers who aren't registered deputy registrars. That's an easy way for them to get students to vote. So definitely I find that in Austin, I think particularly because we are such a political city, and it is so important to a lot of people here, that there is a very strong push to keep students informed and to keep them get them registered to vote in our city. We participate in mock elections and things like that as well. So
So that sounds great. Do you think, from your point of view, students are actually informed and engaged in this to the point where they could name some of the candidates? I'll ask the students later.
Yes, I think it depends on the student. I think there are definitely very motivated students on campus who are very interested in the election process and stay very up to date. I think, of course, with different populations, it's just an interest level as well. I think it depends on what kind of teacher they have, how much information they're getting in the classroom, and even how much the teacher is even really enforcing what their vote means to them and what it really serves in society, and how important it is, especially in our local elections and our state elections, that's our voice as citizens, and that it's important for them to exercise that right.
Thanks. I want to go to the college students next, then we'll get back to the high school students. So start with Zachary Price, a UT student, works with Texas Votes. Can you tell us what you're seeing on campus in terms of attitudes of the students, how likely they are to vote, what they see as the impediments or things that discourage them from voting, and what's being done to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by actually talking about a bit of a distinction I see in young people and voter turnout, and and the distinction I see is students who attend college and not, for the most part. You have people, especially if you're defining the age group as 18 to 24, we have 18 to 24-year-olds who attend college, for the most part concentrated in a single place where we can reach them. 18 to 24-year-olds who do not attend college are much harder to reach, and their turnout is lower. And so you have to walk in knowing that some of the turnout problems you see among very young people come when they aren't in a concentrated place, when they aren't as easy to reach on a day-to-day basis. Now, on campus at UT, I am affiliated with an organization called Texas Votes. It's a nonpartisan civic engagement and voter registration organization. I've served as president. I'm currently the vice president of that organization. In the 2016 election, we made UT the most improved four-year public university in the country for voter turnout. And I think we will hit similar improvement rates this year. We're set to, if the numbers we have reflect what we think they do, we will probably double turnout from 2014 for the 2018 election among UT students. That was our goal. That was our goal coming into 2018. We weren't sure if it was feasible, but based on the numbers we've seen, we think it is. And there's some concrete reasons why. The first is that we were starting from a pretty rough place at UT. Our turnout was low. Our turnout was low in 2012 and 2014. It was not good turnout, so it made it pretty easy to be most improved. But we aren't just most improved up to bad, we're most improved up to better than most colleges. And a lot of that is just steady push from a concerted group of students and teachers at the school. I would say that when you're reaching young people and encouraging them to turn out, the thing that they listen to the most is peer-to-peer, and it's hard sometimes, and that's a lot of colleges struggle with, is that there isn't always that base of students who know how to go through the steps of voter registration and all that, and don't have professors there to support them. And so to have that infrastructure in place where students can then get out and bother their peers and get them registered to vote and get them turned out, that's why you see the success you do. The other thing is that, especially when you have young people who maybe work multiple jobs, they have irregular college classes. I'm sure he can talk more about this at ACC, or it's an even bigger problem. We've got commuter students and all that. You have to meet people where they are. And so the most success that we spend a lot of time tabling and bothering people and all of that, but the most success we have is going into organizations, going into classrooms, and registering those students to vote where they already will be. And it's tremendously successful. We email thousands of professors and TAs at the start of every semester and ask them if we can come register their classes to vote. And we get hundreds of responses in, at least, if not thousands. And so that's the type of things that we do that have success. We also do things, we had an event with live music featuring awesome bands on campus during early voting, trying to get basically distract students into voting. It works. The studies show that works. That enough ruckus will cause people to turn their heads and then remember to get out and vote. You know, we've done stuff like that. We've had a lot of success with those types of events. When you talk about why students don't vote, which is the other part of your question, I think you have to start with the structural impediments in place. First off, I want to highlight voter ID laws that make it harder for certain groups of students to vote. There are always questions, and it's not just the students that the law actually stops. It's not just the population of students who don't have any form of ID. There's a much larger group of students who become confused or concerned that they'll be breaking the law if they go out and vote with their out-of-state license, with their utility bill, with whatever thing that they could vote with. When you continually change things on a group of people who doesn't always have time to read through the Texas Secretary of State's website, it makes it so that they're less likely to turn out and vote, period. I also want to highlight the distribution of polling locations. So we had a large push that I was involved with and several other students at UT to add a second polling location on campus at UT, and we did. The PCL, the library at UT, is now a polling location as well as the Fallon Academic Center. And the numbers show we've increased turnout between those two polling locations. The turnout is higher for on-campus voting than the 2016 election was so far.
Wow.
And so I can't guarantee that every person voting there was a UT student. Their professors and staff and people from the community will come out and vote there, but there have been more votes cast on campus this year in the midterm so far than all of early voting in 2016. Which has shown that was successful. The numbers that we had, we were able to go down to Dana Tepahora, the county clerk, and show her that on the numbers, based on our voting numbers, that we should actually have something like 9 polling locations in the campus area or more, and we had 1, and so we were like, we're asking for 1 more. But a lot of times it takes continuous institutional knowledge of how to fight back against the system, which is something students don't always have, to get something like that, even in a county that does absolutely support voter turnout and is very active. Great.
Thank you. What about the problems? UT has a lot of students who are not from this area.
Yep.
Is it a big problem with getting them through the registration process, especially out-of-state students?
Yes. Out-of-state students are a little bit of a different ballgame. Actually, the group that we have the most trouble with isn't even out-of-state students, because a lot of them know that they're going to be doing a lot of weird things by coming to Texas in the first place. Yeah, they're used to having an entire extra hassle for whatever it is they want to do. We do get questions about out-of-state licenses a lot, especially because the Secretary of State's office has been unclear across election cycles about whether or not out-of-state licenses will be allowed. So that has been definitely a concern. Yes, we have some trouble with them. Who we have more trouble with is students from not Travis County, but in Texas, which is a much bigger population. A lot of students are like, oh, I registered to vote in Houston and I'm good to go, and then don't file for an absentee ballot, and then realize right about now that they're going to have to drive back on a Tuesday when they have class to Houston to cast a ballot. That is such a worse problem for us than out-of-state students. So what we do is we just spend so much time telling students, not only that we do register a lot of students for the first time, but what we do, I would say even more of, is registering them to vote again. Either students who move year to year, because basically every single student moves year to year, so you've got to catch them every single year and be like, no, wait, I know you did it last year, but we're doing it again. And then also, I mean, incoming students coming from every other county, I always strongly encourage them to register here, because I personally have known maybe a dozen or more UT students who waited too long. They're like, no, I like Houston politics, I'm gonna vote there. Didn't find time during early voting to drive back, and then had to either drive down on election day or didn't cast their ballot. And so that's where I think you have more problems than with out-of-state students.
There was a great New York Magazine article about reasons why young people don't vote. They interviewed a lot of them.
Yeah.
And one of them said, it was easier for me to get my medical marijuana license card than to actually get registered to vote. So you can do it all online.
Yeah.
So let's go to Grant Lovelace, your ACC Student Government Association.
Yes.
Can you tell us how things are working out? What do you see on the ACC campus in terms of people getting registered and the attitudes people have about voting or not voting? What are the things holding them back?
So at Austin Community College, I serve as their Director of Communications. So I'm always out talking to students about what's needed on campus, because we do have a lack of civic engagement at Austin Community College when it does come to students being active in their community and actually going out to vote. A lot of students do have trouble voting because they do see the polarization in Texas, specifically when it does come to Beto or Cruz in the mayor race and propositions. And so when they look at it, most of them do not want to actually look at all the information. They just want to deal with option 1 and option 2 and not have to research and analyze every single bit and choose a party. And I feel like when I do talk to these students, the one thing that that's at the forefront of their minds is I have to pick a political side, or I have to pick to be Democrat or Republican in order to vote. And so with the student government ACC, we try to make it as nonpartisan or bipartisan as possible, because we don't want to have Democrats here and Republicans here and then make it harder for students to say, oh, I want to join student government and actually include my voice and include my vote, and make it harder on themselves personally to actually do that. And students who do vote, they are more active in the community, as I've seen with ACC students, and they're more outgoing in terms of getting other people to vote. I know with me and all my friends, we're foodies. We love food. So the day we voted, it was strategic. So I told my friends we should go out to eat. But then I tricked them and went to the voting booth. And so we all voted that day. And then went out to eat. So I always tell people, always plan something, or, trick your friends. Yeah, no. And so that is an example of being outgoing and getting your friends out to vote. Because a lot of people think voting is boring, and it's just a waste of time, and what's the point? Without realizing that your vote can count for generations. Your one vote could change a lot. So, that being said, students at ACC, specifically in the student government, are always outgoing and outreaching to students about what opportunities and resources are needed for those students to feel comfortable and have a safe space to project their voice.
Thank you, Grant. Let's turn to our high school students now, Ben Rogers and Connor Bills. I understand you were picked by teacher to come here, so I'm just curious, you can both answer, why do you think you were selected to appear here?
Well, I think, I've always played an active role in student government at my school to the farthest extent I can, and I went to a town hall for an AISD Board of Trustees election at my school, and Miss Jagger saw me there, and I've talked with her a lot about contemporary issues as well as government structure, and I had her in my 11th grade U.S. history class, and so she knows I'm very interested in U.S. politics and government.
First of all, I'd like to thank everyone here, and thank you at Common Ground for having me. I'd say I was selected to be here because I engage in the discussions in the classroom. I've always loved politics. I volunteered with community activists, and I am in Miss Jagger's class at school.
Thank you. Have you both been able to register already?
Yes.
What did you think of that process?
So I actually went on my 18th birthday to the county tax office off of Airport Boulevard, and my mom can attest that I was so excited to register to vote. And I didn't know how it was, and I was afraid to go before I turned 18, and I didn't know. In retrospect, I now know you can register before you turn 18 for the next election, which I didn't know. But it was like my birthday gift, like my turning 18. And though there was no line for like the office where you register to vote, and I just wrote my name and address on a piece of paper, and that was it. It was a lot easier than I expected.
So for me, on the day that I was 17 and 10 months, which is the day you can register, I went to this library and picked up a mail form where you can send it in and you'd get your registration card. Problem is, I did submit the form. I'm waiting for a month or so when they say that they would send it to me. I never get it, so then I have to go to the register at the school and sign up there. And then a few weeks later, I get both registration cards. So, yeah, it was a bit complicated, but I did end up voting, so that's all that really matters.
Okay, so that would be my next question. Have you been able to do the early voting, and what did you think of that process? Were you intimidated by it?
I was actually a little bit intimidated by it. I was in, like, I voted here on October 22nd, the first day of early voting, and I was so excited, and I got here at like 6 p.m. and the line was so long. And I was like, I don't know, should I do it? I got in line anyways, because I was like, I don't know if I will be available the next couple days. So, and I was like, and I saw the police officers, I think there was a sheriff's deputy, and it was all quiet and like so official, and they were asking people to turn off their phones. And I was like, I had never been in a situation like that before, and like being my first time voting, I didn't know the etiquette for it. So it definitely was a little bit intimidating, but on like holistically, I really enjoyed it.
For me, I came last week here at 7:30 in the morning, and I was not intimidated by the process because what I did previously was go online to Ballotpedia where they have a sample ballot, and then what I would do to determine who I vote for is go on the candidate's website and look at the issues that they have and just compare and see, who do I care about more, and then I would go look up both of their names and see if they had any like scandals or anything like that. And I had a list of everyone I was going to vote for, and I came in, and it was a very smooth process for me.
Great. It's wonderful. So I'm hearing a lot of questions people have, early voting and first-time voters. And see, Amy, if you can address if this is being taught at all. But people are asking questions. Will the government know how I voted? Do I have to declare a party? What happens if I do something wrong? Will I be in legal trouble? Do I risk being put in jail, being charged with something if I do something wrong? I just don't know what to do. Is this the type of questions that people are they addressed in class, or do you feel that this is getting asked at the college level too?
Somewhat, we don't have a lot of students that are ready to vote or are able to vote, so they don't, I think they get more nervous when they actually go. I don't see those kinds of questions in class. What we have done in the past, because Anderson High School is a polling station, is we've encouraged those senior government teachers to actually just take their students down so they can see what it looks like even if they can't vote. So then they can, just watch maybe a couple of their peers go and vote. So it's not so intimidating the first time that they go and do it on their own.
What do you see for college students?
Yeah, I would say that question gets asked less during the process before someone's about to vote, and more used as a reason why people don't vote. Where I don't hear that a lot out of voters. There are definitely people get nervous the first time they go. That's definitely the case, but especially students voting on campus, for example, there's usually a pretty long line of students in front of you not getting arrested, and that helps you realize that you'll probably make it out the other side, okay? Well, it's pretty hard to provide the amount of information that you need ahead of time to students, especially. It's really a struggle, because we have made incredible strides with voter registration, with voter turnout on campus, but we're still definitely dragging down Travis County in terms of both registration and turnout. That's not going to stop being the case until it's not a population of 18 to 24-year-olds. And so a lot more of what we do is catching people very quickly and taking a minute of their time to register, and it's very hard to take much more than that amount of time to provide the extra information to answer those questions they need. And so no more where I hear that question is when I meet somebody who's a non-voter, maybe in their mid-20s, and I ask them, hey, why don't you vote? Sometimes I'll hear things like, I've been too busy. Sometimes I'll hear things like, I don't feel informed. I always try and help them with that. But then I do very much hear things like, well, I'm afraid the government will know. I'm afraid people will know. That kind of that kind of fear, that almost paranoia about the government knowing what you're doing at all times, and that voting is interacting with the government on that level. And so it can be hard to address those questions because there is, this kind of concept of the government as big brother that some people buy into, and I think that's more people buy into it in their early to late 20s, I would say, than at other times.
I would say that from my high school experience, political participation and civic engagement was not emphasized. It was more, in my high school, it was more about get your diploma and go. More than actually being informed about the topics and issues that were going on at the time. Even now at ACC, I do see a lot of times where students are confused or intimidated, or they feel misunderstood when it comes to their ideologies or what they believe in, and it's hard to pick a side. But with me, I would say that being Democrat and Republican is just a label, unless you want to pick a side and be on that side. But a lot of times when we do put in our vote, most students I've talked to said they're not Democratic or Republican, they're more independent. With that being said, I think those questions aren't addressed because in a lot of environments, especially in educational facilities, it's not really important to discuss those issues. And with our socio-political climate right now, it is important to address those issues and give students a breakdown of what it's like to vote, about political participation, about what your individual voice can do, and how you can utilize it in your community. But once again, those questions aren't really addressed in high school or even at the college level.
Our high school students, do you see students being intimidated by the whole process, even scared of it? I know you both were enthusiastic about it, obviously.
Yeah. I think it sometimes is seen as a little bit scary. I know that the language of the ballot, when my friends have seen like an example ballot, it's like 4 pages long of back-to-back elections, and half of them are judiciary elections. And that is not like a core piece of the government we learn about, that how judges are elected. And the advertisements for like judicial races are not as well seen by people my age. So it's that half the ballot right off the bat is unfamiliar territory. And then the like propositions use language like, shall this bond be amended and resolved or passed, and it's uses all these verbs and actions that students are like, what? And it doesn't quite make sense the first time they read it, so it ends up going off like, okay, I'll just worry, I'll learn about it later, and then it doesn't come to fruition.
For me, I actually spoke to my close friend who said that he was not going to vote, and he was 18. I was not very happy with him, and his reason was he didn't believe that he could make an informed decision. He believed that he may have not had the judgment or the time to look through the issues, and I think something that we should do and value is telling kids that you have the responsibility to vote. You are an American citizen, and it's part of your job to be civically engaged. We can do all these things about like preparing you and like giving you these resources, but like you need to take responsibility at some point too, as well, personally.
When you two voted, were you aware that you did not have to vote in all the races and all the ballot measures? You could go in and cast 1 or 2 votes on things that mattered and walk out?
I was, but I knew that I wanted to use my voice the best I could to my ability, so I took all the time I could to learn about every single election, and it helped me learn about the government as well. I'd only known about the judicial branch at the federal level and how they get appointed, so I didn't even know it was possible to elect judges. And so there was a whole process for me of learning about the judiciary branch at a local level and then at the state level, and I knew that I wanted to vote in every single election.
For me, I attended Texas Boys State, so I sort of knew how the structure of the state government worked and how local offices are. Personally, I knew I had to vote in those, or not that I was forced to, but like I believe that I should vote in those elections because they're important elections. Like even if I may not value those elections at the highest level, I still should view them as important elections. You know, I saw a T-shirt. It says that the mayor of the city that Jaws was taken in is still the mayor in Jaws 2. So, you know, it shows how important voting in local elections is. You know, so.
That's a good example.
So it sounds like there's 2 aspects that prevent students from voting. One is just the process of getting registered and getting out to the vote, and if you have to do a mail-in ballot, that's even harder. The other is the attitude that, why should I bother? I don't know enough, or my vote's not going to matter, or I voted in 2016 and my candidate lost, so why bother anymore? What do you see as the problems with the attitude, and how can we change the attitude of students? And I'll start with the college students here.
I want to take issue with the second part of what you said. I don't know necessarily that it's just why should I bother. I think that there is a very well-meaning group of young people who do not vote because they feel that they are not informed, and that there are other people who will make an informed opinion and they don't want to hurt anybody. They legitimately, they don't cast a ballot because they're afraid that their opinion will hurt someone. And they're like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. And they don't necessarily know where to find the resources. A lot of the push we've seen with high school campuses, which is very awesome here in Austin ISD, still hasn't happened to other places in the state and the country. And it's very, very recent. A lot of it came out of the Texas Civil Rights Project's initiatives in the last few years. And so there's a lot of young people out there who didn't get any of this information or very little of it in high school, and who haven't gotten a lot of it in college. And so I think there is a population of people who don't vote who because they feel that they're not informed, but it's not a why should I bother question always. For some it definitely is. Both candidates suck, everybody's awful, don't talk to me. But there's definitely a population out there of people who will sit and talk to you about politics, but then be like, I don't feel like I know enough about it, about city council races to cast a ballot, you know? And that's the population of people that frustrates me the most. That I spend the most time like, no, we're gonna get you out to vote. I'll introduce you to a city council candidate. Tell me what I have to do. But I think that's a population that you have to talk about in there. Is people who a lot of those people become voters. It's not. I'm sure there are people sitting in this room who didn't vote when they were 20 who vote now, and so that does happen down the line. You see that, and so people just take a little bit longer to get involved.
Yeah, I think part of the problem we face is lack of information does not stop us baby boomers from voting.
Informed or not.
I would say you would need to encourage and find another way to outreach those students or those people. Because a lot of times when it comes to voter outreach, some groups and some organizations aren't inclusive to which groups they reach out to. And then it also comes in effect to where some students may not want to go vote. and that's why me and my foodie friends, we had went out to eat afterwards. So you would just need to find a way to encourage those people, because everybody has a different way of motivation, of encouragement, of being able to have the courage to go and vote. Because you are right about how students don't want to make that informed decision, because they're not informed. And they don't want to see a candidate lose that they voted for and say, oh, man, I didn't try hard enough, or my vote didn't matter. So that way when the next election comes, they don't even bother to vote. And so I think it's all about encouragement and voter outreach and being more inclusive to those different groups and organizations when it comes to colleges and universities.
If I can add one other thing to that, it's that I think that in the vast majority of cases, political campaigns and organizations don't do a very good job of reaching out to young people either. And there's definitely been changes in that. I think this year I've seen a lot better outreach to students. But they're also, there's a reason why they're not treated as a priority, because traditionally they haven't voted. So why, as a campaign, would you expend the resources? But also because they can be a little harder to reach. A lot of them are in apartment complexes. You know what's really hard to go walk and knock doors on? Apartment complexes. There's some structural things there that make them harder to reach, but that also I think drives some of the, why would you feel invested in the candidates if you've never met any of the candidates, and if you don't participate in the process, you don't know that they're a candidate forums, put on by local groups. You don't know that those things exist in the first place. So it can be that there's, like some first steps there that they get missed, where, they don't get the mailer, they don't get the phone call that I'm sure everyone in this room gets. That's wrong.
So Amy, great news about getting people registered, student level. The other step in that is getting them out to vote.
Well, or just impressing upon them the importance of what the vote means. I think, like you guys have all said, these students are very enthusiastic. I have huge groups of students that are very enthusiastic about voting, but I also see the other side where I have groups of students who don't understand what voting means or what even their role in the process is. They're more concerned about finishing school for the day so they can go work at their second job, or go home and help take care of their younger siblings. And so to them, they have other needs that they are more focused on than really worrying about what's going on in the community. That's why I think it's so important for teachers to take them, just to show them what the process looks like, and to really talk to them, especially in government, to really talk to them about what their vote means, especially at the local level here in Austin, and how they can affect change within their communities. You may not, I tell them they may not be able to see it at the state level or especially at the national level, but if you're worried about that apartment complex is getting built on, parkland that you live next door to, if you want to say and how to stop that, then you have to go out and vote and get informed on how to change what you don't like about your community. But that's the hard part, teaching teenagers, we're helping them understand, what their voice is in society and how that is going to affect them in the long term.
Ben and Connor.
One thing I think that will give students the bravery to go out and vote, especially ones that are new, 18, freshly minted adults by law, I think is moving the government class from senior year to earlier on, sophomore year. Because in high school, the government class is the very last semester of high school. And by then, a lot of students have checked out, they're done with high school, they're I'm just trying to pass and get my diploma, and that's it. And they're not really invested in how they're doing in school, grades, let alone learning the curriculum. And so there are other paths as well in high school that will prevent you from taking the government class itself. If you do IB history at Anderson at least, the government class is substituted by the IB history classes, which cover government TEKs, but not government as a whole. And I really do enjoy the IB history classes, but the government TEKs get they're too integrated into the history class itself. So when I look at what I'm learning about the government, I'm learning about it in the context of the history of the government and not what it is now and what I need to do that. And I think if Anderson or AISD moved the government class to sophomore year, I could take the government class and then do my IB history as well. The second thing I think that could increase it is avoiding partisan registration groups. There's a lot of my friends that have had canvassers come to their houses and be like, hi, we're with blank candidate for Texas, will you vote for them and register right now? And that really shuts people down, and I think because a lot of my friends, we come to school every day and we see police officers and security guards and like greeting us at the door and as part of like a police state at our school. And so like the way the government is having a relationship with the students isn't too great. And so when these students see these groups trying to get them to register to vote, it's like, oh great, it's another government entity trying to get me involved with the government. And they already have that negative relationship, and so they're transferring it. And then with the partisan groups, a lot of my friends that are 18 and aren't voting are not doing it because they don't like the candidate, and the only groups that have come to their door are with the opposite candidate and like trying to get them to vote for them, not knowing that registering to vote doesn't mean you're voting at that very moment. Yeah, those are the two things, yeah.
The reach out problem.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are very opposed or not engaged in the process because they think, you know, the federal government isn't going to affect me, and so they don't vote for that. But something that does and will turn out people more is focusing on state and local issues. I think something that's very important at our high school in particular is the way that the revenue is funded. What was the program called again?
Robin Hood.
Robin Hood, yeah, where they move revenue out of the district, and you know this angers a lot of students because when when you're going and visiting other schools in Texas, such as San Marcos, where they have these huge football fields that are funded by some of our tax revenue, and then you go and look at some schools in our own district, such as Reagan, LBJ, and even Anderson. You see facilities that are worn down, and these issues do matter to students, and if you prioritize those issues, then people are going to say, hey, voting does actually impact me on a daily basis.
I love it. Talk to students about their high school football stadium. I'm going to ask Connor and Ben to ignore the fact that you have a teacher sitting next to you for the moment, and tell us, where do you think high school students actually get most of their information about political issues?
I would say social media has the biggest anchor in young people's lives, and that I think it's just because it's super easy. All my friends have Instagram and Snapchat and Twitter, and so all of their feeds are filled with political advertisements and political tweets and social media posts and so then they're like, oh, I guess that's all I need to know. And so it causes them to not continue to look out in other sources where they get information about the government and the elections. And then I also think a lot of the news that does get to them from like journals and newspapers probably gets filtered out unless it's really scary, and then they notice it. They're like, oh my gosh, there's people being prosecuted for voter fraud. I shouldn't vote. But when they talk about like good voting stuff, it doesn't quite reach my friends and students at Anderson. So I think social media definitely has the biggest anchor.
Do you agree, Connor?
100%. Nowadays, as Ben said, you get your information in 150 characters online, or something that people do use a lot now is YouTube, right? People will watch, a famous commentator among younger generations is a man named Ben Shapiro. Whether you like him or not, he is very effective with young people. And the thing is, it is a problem because, when you're just reading a tweet or reading a headline, you're not actually understanding the analysis behind the issue itself. You're just getting just a small look at it. And that's a big problem. And it's sad to see the local newspapers, you're seeing stories about how they're cutting back on the coverage that they're doing. You know, in Pittsburgh, they no longer have a daily newspaper because they had to cut it down some. And this gives students, you know, it prevents them from actually analyzing the issues. And when you're looking at them, you should be able to, you know, go more in depth, and that's just something that the generation won't have as much as previous generations did.
When you say social media, what aspect of it? Are we talking things their friends say? Are we talking political advertising? Are we talking about what?
I think when I say social media, I definitely am talking about people passing down secondhand information. It's not direct information regarding tax law. It's not like economic policies. It's, I heard this candidate was against me. It's like that. It's just kind of like, this candidate is against this group from this person who is not from this candidate's campaign or involved with the government whatsoever. And so it's like, social media has unlimited shares. So sometimes my friends are getting information that's been passed down 100 or more times. And I don't have social media because it's hard for me to differentiate that. But for a lot of my peers, they probably don't go towards the same effort to make that difference. And is this secondhand information or is it primary information?
Amy, does any of this surprise you?
No, in fact, I would definitely agree with them. You know, when I taught government, a lot of the students talked about getting their information about candidates from Snapchat at the time, following the news. I don't know. I haven't used Snapchat. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but apparently there's a news feed access available through it. And so, you know, to me, that's a very limited look at, you know, what's going on in our communities and what's going on with the candidates. Connor, did you want to?
One positive thing, though, about this generation is I think they can tell which online sources are more, you know, trustworthy than older generations are, just because they've grown up using the internet. So they're not going to, you know, if they see a Facebook article about, you know, John McCain kills 100 people, they're going to say, seems a bit fishy to me. But, you know, and I think, you know, they may not use it as much as, and not pay attention as much, but they have a better handle on which sources are more credible.
I'm glad you said that, because my first thought of getting news from people retweeting or reposting things sounds like a breeding ground for a lot of false information. And I want to see if you get the same experience at the college level, if there's any differences you notice, especially with the weeding out false information aspect of it.
I can say from my experience as being a director of communications that I do see media bias a lot of times. And also with social media, you have people that tend to have selective exposure to where if it doesn't pertain to their beliefs, their ideologies, they tune it out. And so when it does come to the fact where you do have, what's her name? Taylor Swift and Cardi B. They went on Twitter and at a concert and said, go out and vote. The voter turnout in different states tremendously populated because they were influential and because of social media. Most people are like, if Taylor Swift said to go to vote, I'm gonna go to vote. If Cardi B said to go to vote, I'm gonna go to vote. And so social media does have that positivity, but along with that positivity, a lot of students at ACC do not check to the credibility of some sources. And I think that's where media bias does come in, to where we do see our friends share this, or we see CNN say one thing and Fox News say another. And so a lot of times they do get confused about what information is out there, because as a technical and digital generation, a lot of times, a lot of students do depend on their social media for their news, for what's going on in the world. And they don't really check to see if it's credible or if it's an actual resource to gain more information. So they look at it as a 1D screen and multi-dimensionally.
Yeah, I mean, screening is definitely a problem. He's correct, actually, Connor's correct, that young people are more likely to pick what the correct news is if you give them. There's a study that showed that if you give students, if you give people a list of like news articles, and some of them are correct and some of them are fake, young people do a better job of picking out which ones are correct than any other age group, which is fascinating to me. I wouldn't have expected it at all. So I do think that having grown up in the online environment has made us better, but they were better, but it was something like they picked 55% of the correct ones. So, you know, better, but we're all bad at it. I think that there are definitely some negatives, and we've done a pretty good job of addressing those. There's some positives to social media and civic engagement as well. During the 2016 election, Snapchat live streamed one of the debates. More than one, actually, but live streamed several of the debates and offered that, and I knew people who watched them on Snapchat. That was what they did. They're like, they wouldn't have known where else to look. Like, they didn't know CNN. I don't. They have a website. I don't know. They looked on Snapchat. It was available to them, and so they checked it out there. You'll see some stuff like that on Facebook or Twitter sometimes. There's always a really concerted effort, especially among college students near voter registration deadlines, where, man, my feed will be populated with hundreds of tweets that are register to vote in some form, that are dumb things trying to convince students to register to vote. They're jokes, they're links that are supposed to take you to an article that's about an unrelated thing, but it's actually a voter registration link. There are all sorts of tricks, and the tricks of varying like ethical levels, but that there are, it offers an easy way to put your support out there for voting, to make that your personal stance. No, right now we're voting. You'll see people change their usernames to register to vote today, and stuff like that. That's excellent, and that's really good. But it also, like has been highlighted, it makes it easier for things that can be not even necessarily absolutely false, but slightly false to populate a lot. I'll see things that are just a small amount incorrect hit my feed a ton of times, because students are very good at telling when something is blatantly false, but what about something that's just a little off about voting? You know, that they'll say there's a line 2 hours long. There was no 2 hour long line at the polls that day. It wasn't true. I don't know where that information came from, but it wasn't true. But that's a reasonable thing to believe, and that's a hard thing to disprove on social media. So that's what I see.
This has been so much fun listening to the folks. I forgot we're supposed to have audience questions too. So I'd like to take some time and open it up to audience questions.
Yeah, first I'd like to thank all the panelists for coming out today and for your participation in the voting and political process. I applaud you for that. I have several questions. One is, are the people on the panel, especially the kind of the leaders of groups and teachers, aware of the League of Women Voters nonpartisan voting guide that they put out every time, which has a lot of really great information on candidates and on propositions, where you can see in a nonpartisan way what their stance is on? Some people won't even respond because they don't want to tell people, but it's a great resource. So I hope everyone's aware of the League of Women Voters voter guide. Secondly, how much do you hear from people, from your peers, from people you're trying to register, how much I'm not going to vote because I'm in a gerrymandered district and my vote isn't going to count because it's the same party, the same people every time that always win by big majority, so my vote doesn't count. And lastly, in a situation, especially I guess this is more of a college situation, but where you have students coming from Harris County who are registered to vote there, and they come here and they register, how does that resolve itself so these people aren't committing a crime because they're registered to vote in two places at the same time and playing into the hands of some of our politicians who say there's voter fraud?
I can answer that.
So voter fraud question, registering voter fraud.
Well, what happens is the Secretary of State nullifies the older one, so it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, good.
So that's all their responsibility to take
Okay,
care of that.
thank you.
And I would say that definitely we use the League of Women Voters information sheets as a resource in schools. You know, definitely it's something the government teachers are providing to students, or at least giving them the website so that they can go and look. We do a lot of activities where we actually have students research the individual candidates, and that's always a good place for them to start there, and then as a jumping off point. I would say gerrymandering with high school students is a concept that a lot of them don't understand, and I would say adults even struggle with really understanding it. So that's not really something that comes up, that we're more pushing them to go out and, use their vote, use their voice in society. So it's not gerrymandering and worrying about, that your liberal vote in our district is going to be outed because of the more stronger Republican vote.
Yeah, just going off that, we do actually use League of Women voter guides on campus. We actually always request more of them. We hand them out during all of early voting to students. So in past years, we've handed out hundreds and hundreds of League of Women voter guides. We create little sheets with the link and all that. It's a tremendous resource for students because it's pretty easy and you can carry it to the polls. It's perfect. So we'll hand them out right outside the polling location. The other thing, the gerrymander question, I don't think students don't vote because of gerrymandering specifically, for two reasons. One, a lot of students are optimists, and so I think you end up, you say you put a barrier like that in the way, and they get mad. And they're like, well, no, I'm going to take 3 friends and go vote.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's obviously not the case for all of them. The other half of it is the ones who don't vote because they think there are barriers in the way. I don't think most of them would cite gerrymandering specifically, but gerrymandering definitely, and just lack of fair districts and representation, contributes to their overall feeling that their voice doesn't matter in the process no matter what. So I wouldn't say that a lot of them have that nuanced understanding of gerrymandering and don't vote, but they definitely have a feeling that the representatives aren't going to represent them no matter who they vote for, and I think gerrymandering certainly contributes to that.
I would say with the league, I'm so sorry. We had a ballot session with ACC Government and Political Science where we had students come and actually meet representatives from that organization and get informed. And then with gerrymandering, we also look at different social and economic issues like gentrification. And we do see that as an issue for students to actually go out and vote because they do feel enclosed or they feel outed in a way. So yeah.
Joanne?
So I'm interested in knowing what, often politicians are told that they're not talking to young folks. So I'm curious about what the issues are for young folks. I know what the New York Times thinks the issues are for young folks, but I want to hear from young folks what they think the issues are.
Are you asking for me personally or generally?
Both.
Generally, I'd say that for young people, the issue would probably be, I think Trump, a lot of it is probably the biggest indicator of how people are going to vote is whether or not they support the president in terms of which party they're going to vote for generally. Obviously if you're opposed to Trump, you're going to vote Democrat, and if you're supporting Trump, you're most likely going to vote Republican. With regard to specific issues in the state of Texas, I imagine that immigration is important among young people, climate change is important among young people, gun rights or gun control is important among young people. Those are probably the most important issues, I'd say, today.
I think that social movements and social politics tend to become the biggest focus of young people's votes because issues like economics and taxes don't boil down into simplified areas. And social politics can be boiled down into super simple ideas. And I think for a lot of my classmates, finding the time to understand economics when they're not in the economics class at Anderson is just, it doesn't make sense. So they're able to focus on political issues, but mostly just the social political issue part of it. And I think that even though a lot of media outlets and newspapers say politicians aren't talking a lot to youths, I think that the outreach I've seen become the greatest of all time or in my life because with the internet and the ability for quick access, a student can watch a debate that happened last month When years before, where social media and the internet weren't so like broadly connecting us, you would have to wait till it got aired on television, and which limited it. And so I think the way like young people cast their votes really goes into like what is easiest or tends to be like generally the easiest way for them to look at it, because they've been a child their whole lives. And so finally being treated as an adult in one regard can be very unfamiliar. And so they don't want to take steps too far, whether they are actively or consciously deciding that or just subconsciously doing it.
I think there's a distinction between the issues that matter to young people and the issues that drive the votes of young people. And so Ben did a great job of laying out what causes young people to vote, and it's social issues a lot. It's gun reform, it's questions about abortion, about LGBT issues. Those are the types of things, because a lot of times they impact you personally on a day-to-day basis. Those are the types of issues that students use to vote in most cases. But when you ask students what issues impact them, they become a lot more economic. Am I going to get a job out of college? Am I going to be able to afford a college tuition? It'll be stuff like traffic, like education, the things that drive a lot of other people's votes, that drive votes down ballot. Those are a lot of the issues that matter most to young people when you ask them, but they aren't always the ones that they vote on, because it can be very hard to see how local government is working for you when you don't have any chance to interact with local government. So you don't see where the end in sight is to traffic. You don't know why there's traffic on Mopac, you just know that it's always been there. So it's... Yeah.
I would say a lot of times with the students I speak with and see on a day-to-day basis, it deals more with the social issues, because a lot of students are focused on financial aid, on FAFSA, on will they be able to pursue their aspirations and goals going off to law school or whatever the case may be, and they look at a lot of things that do impact them when it comes to LGBTQ, rights for minorities, immigration, family, all these different issues and topics that are brought into a conversation. And sometimes what drives a student isn't the same thing that impacts somebody, as he previously said. And seeing that difference is easier. It's going to be very easier to outreach to those students, because you would know, okay, so this impacts you, but this is what drives you. And it goes back to emphasizing and addressing those questions.
Let's go.
Yes, please. Actually, my question will be based on what the speakers had given information. As an example, Mr. Connor, what he says that he's pushing his friends to go and elect, and he was not happy with them. I mean, we have to think why. At the same time, Mr. Zachary, as a leader in his community, he could succeed to motivate people, to give them some kind of incentive to go for voting, and he could double the ratio of the voting comparing with the previous year. So I don't know whether they will agree with me or not. I mean, the question is for all of them. So it means there is something is missed here. Those students, they are thinking why they have to go and vote, why they have to bother themselves. As far they are feeling hopeless. They don't think their vote will change anything. And to some extent, that is right, that is true. So what I believe from my side, I don't know whether you agree with me or not, because especially you are having some community as a leaders. What they need is a leader or as a union to forget about Republicans and Democrats and go what is good for the students, and to have goals. Goals could be based on X university as individual. It could be based on what you call it, city universities as a common. It could then finally it could be based on, as a Congress for Students' Union, to be on strong really and force what they want. This it needs leaders. It needs for people like you, young people, to read more and to read experience of international leaders and see why. I think what you need mostly, it is a goal. You need a target. Why you
Yes.
have to,
Do you have a specific question?
yeah, the question, yeah. I mean, the question is, will the students be able to have a target to, in a way, to convince all the students to go and vote, or they won't be able? Target could be, just as an example.
Okay, let's
I'm sorry, just.
Why should the students
Yeah,
vote?
just 1 second, just 1 second. A
We-
target
Look,
could
we
be,
have to get the panel here. and
Yeah.
the other
it's up to
students.
you, but
Yeah, thanks.
Why should students bother to vote? Yeah, you can go for it.
I would say students should bother to vote because I always emphasize that your vote is your voice. That it's just not going to be something that you just do. Because I always tell students that when you put in your vote, it's just not for a year, it's not for 2 years, it's something generational. It could change the output for a lot of different things that are going on. So, oh my gosh, I can't speak, socio-politically. And so I always tell students, you don't want to not put in your vote and keep a current situation that is uncomfortable and uncompromising for a lot of people going. Because one vote does change a lot, and one vote can change the outcome of so many different issues that are going on right now.
So if I understood your question correctly with the other part of it as well, a lot of what we do is nonpartisan, and it does focus on student issues and meeting students where they are. That's what's effective. It's not necessarily, I mean, it's about issues, it's about making something relate to students, not what works for a traditional group of voters never works for students. It just, as a general rule, if whatever you have and that you're trying to use to convince students to do something, and you're using the exact same thing to convince the general population, it's not going to work with one or the other. And so, we do try and tailor it, and there are a lot of leaders on campus who do encourage people. We have the student body president send emails out, send tweets to students, who will tweet and post on Facebook and encourage students to vote. We do a lot of that. The problem is that, there's such an ingrained culture of non-voting with young people that we can double turnout for 2018 and still be at 36% turnout for UT students who, again, vote at higher rates than non-college students and ACC students do. So you can make incredible strides and still be below where you want to be. And it just takes time and work over years, over decades.
Sounds like we're getting back to the high school football stadium issue.
Yeah.
Something to motivate students.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the local issues definitely impact the students as well. And I think that something that's sort of cliche is that people did die for their right to vote, like in the military, but also civil rights leaders, what they did and what they've sacrificed for that basic human rights vote is still something that you should appreciate and go out and use for you.
I think in high school, students are very impressionable people. And before senior year, it's not like teachers are coming up and saying, you should get ready to vote, be voting, and you're 16, you're 15. And so you go through almost your whole life up until this point where you see other people doing it, but not yourself. So students don't think it's for them. And they, making that differentiation between, I am allowed to vote, but am I, mature enough, and that question inside happens. And I think students don't recognize that there's a reason that it's 18 and not 19 or 20. And they don't, it's hard to make that contrasting decision, now it is for me, compared to the past 18 years. But I think because students are so impressionable, that when we get teachers in the classroom, for students that are still in high school, I think that's why like voter registration at schools is very successful when it happens, because students are really impressionable. So when they see all their friends getting registered to vote, and when they see their friends voting, they want to start participating as well.
Let's go to the back of the room, woman Reed.
Yes.
This question is for Zach, and maybe the others have other things to add to that too, and gets a little bit to what I think he was getting around, and that is organization. And what you also said about how you appeal to people, and the word fun hasn't come up once. And I know that's been really successful.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely, I can. Thank you. A pointed question, because she knows some of what we do at UT. So, like I mentioned before, we put on an event. That was 2 days ago at UT, where we brought on live music, and it was like real live musicians. We contracted out with a group that helped us find live musicians who are willing to do it at a lower rate, and brought food on campus, and really tried to make the voting experience fun. Because when you make voting fun, you make civic engagement fun, people participate, you know, and it is all about personal connection as well. You know, that people don't, young people who are unlikely to vote become much more likely to when they get a text from someone they like who says, hey, I'm just reminding you to vote, like we talked about it before. They vote. That happens. And so being able to tie it to positive things, you know, so there's a very conscious effort around the country right now at college campuses to turn voting into a party. And so that was the idea behind the event we put on. In the past, we've done a parade to the polls where we had people chanting, and we had food at that as well. We tried to basically distract as many people as we could on the way to the polls and be like, hey, no, this way. And that has been shown to have a positive impact on voter turnout as well. Tying it to social groups, going into organizations and doing it, and making it everybody registers to vote together right now as a group. You know, we do that a lot with sororities and fraternities, for example. That's very successful. Anything you can do to make voting fun, it succeeds. One thing I'll add is it's not something we do at UT, but I love the idea of they do it at Prairie View A&M University, which is a historically black college outside of Houston. And which has had its own voting problems recently, I will add, and for decades. But at Prairie View A&M, they have this party they throw every year, where it's on election day, I think, and it's put on by basically the leaders of the campus, the student body leaders and the fraternity leaders will throw a massive party that everyone wants to go to, and to get in, you have to show your I voted sticker. And it's this entire social event, and it's hugely successful at Prairie View. And so that's, you know, you have to tailor it to colleges. That's a smaller one with a more homogenous community, so that type of thing works better there than it does at UT, for example. But everything you can do to make voting fun, to tie civic engagement into, you know, what you're doing anyway, to the social groups you have, is tremendously successful, and that there are a lot of people working on how to do that right now.
I just remember Uncle Sam handing out
Yeah.
things and
we also have
an eagle.
Yeah, we have eagle costume now. We have an inflatable eagle costume that students will wear and basically yell at people to vote. But Uncle Sam costume, I don't fit into the eagle costume. My head is too big, actually. But, you know, we do stuff like that. Anything you can do to distract people. And, you know, if that means making fun of yourself in the process, that's fine. You know, you've got to, sometimes it's a degrading experience getting people out to vote. But it's worth it.
I mean, even when your director of an institute does it, that's
Yeah.
pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So that was a question to Zach, but if anyone else had comments, they want to jump in.
I would say fun does come into equation with my organization because I'm just an ambitious soul. So I just love doing things that include getting up and being interactive with students. I know we're planning an event that is going to be kind of a party-like thing, and you do have to show your sticker. It's kind of like Prairie View because my brother, he goes to PV, and he gave me an idea. I said, oh, that sounds nice. We should start that at ACC. And so fun does come to the equation when it does come to voter participation in the process of voting and waiting in line and stuff. Because it does deal with that personal connection, and it does deal with the bond that you do have with those people that are coming to these polls and voting. Because they are taking the time and they are committed to voting. And a lot of times, it does seem boring when you look at it on social media or when your friends talk about it. Because I know one of my friends texted me and said, do I really have to wait in that long line with no food and stand there for so-and-so minutes to try and vote? And it does get into people's minds a reason not to vote, because it's such a tedious process to wait in line and do this, that, and the third, but that's what early voting is for. So yes, I think fun can be implemented in the equation when it does come to voter outreach and voter participation.
Let's go back.
There's something that I heard you say that I was really concerned about, and that is the fear of government. And that's new to me. I don't understand why young people are afraid of the government. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think that was what I said, and I'll elaborate a little bit, apologize. I don't mean that young people are universally afraid of the government or that this is some massive problem. I think it just plays into fear of not being part of the system almost, that there are people, the kind of broad idea that there are people out there who don't want you to vote, or that 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 you're not part of the system in some way. And it's not a universal experience that people feel that way. There are definitely, I think, young people who have been shaped by the way our politics has been recently, who are afraid of the consequences of government and are afraid that no matter what happens, the government isn't going to represent them because they feel they have not been represented by the government within their memory. And I think that's dangerous. But I think that I don't want to overstate the fear of government as a reason for non-voting. It's more something that I think comes into play sometimes when you ask certain groups of people who fit into the definition of young, especially I think in their mid to late 20s, that type of person who isn't voting now. Some of those people are the same ones who are afraid of fluoride in the water. There's a definite population of those people, but it's not the majority of young people at all.
Well, I know in my neighborhood, I have a lot of Latinos, and they do not vote, and of course they are afraid of ICE. So if they make themselves publicly known in any way, they put themselves in danger. And I was just wondering if that was a feeling among students, because I hope it's not.
Something at Anderson I've noticed is there's a lot of students that immigrate from other countries at Anderson, and it's a hub for that because it's an international baccalaureate school, and for other reasons as well. And I know that there are a lot of students that are afraid or don't know like their visa or their citizenship card, like what is valid and what isn't, and they don't want to accidentally commit a crime when they're trying to vote, and they don't know who to ask to fix it. There's not one resource at the school where you can ask the question, I don't know if I'm eligible to vote, should I register? Or something like that. And I know there are people definitely afraid from all backgrounds. There are students that immigrate from Iran, Europe, and even Canada that are just I don't know how this works quite yet. So it's definitely something the government is definitely a separate entity than them, and in that relationship is not very clear. And then about the police or about the being afraid of the government, at Anderson at least, and I know this for a lot of public schools and high schools now, there's security guards and police officers and school resource officers everywhere around the campus. And students create this relationship with these security guards and police officers where they really only talk to them when they're in trouble. And so that causes a relationship between the students and government entities like the police, where that's basically the only interaction between the government and the students, that, the government's just out to get me. And I think that creates this momentum of why a lot of young people, Anderson in particular, are not voting.
I would say it was too, not just a fear, but disinterestedness in what's going on, because they feel like what they're seeing in the media is too overwhelming for them, and that plays into their decision about whether or not that they want to vote, that they would rather just take a step back and ignore all of it than really understanding what their voice means and how they can affect change in society.
Think a lot.
I would say quickly that when you look at minority groups such as African Americans or the Latinx community or different races and ethnicities, it becomes fearful because of the fact that we do see a lot of times different states where they do push polling offices 50 miles, 100 miles down the road where people have to drive long ways just to go out and vote, and we do see a lot of discrimination when it does come to voting, to where certain groups or certain minority groups, they do not want to vote, and that does become an issue. For example, in Alabama, they're having an issue with voter outreach and political participation, to where certain communities and certain cities, polling places are far from the neighborhoods, are far from people's homes, to where they don't have the money or the necessities to actually go out into those polling places.
To your point, there aren't as many college students who are afraid of the government, but there is certainly a substantial portion of the Hispanic population of African American students who are afraid of the government for what I view as valid reasons. What I was more addressing is people who are afraid of the government for reasons that aren't valid. But I mean, when you have a government that is even threatening to look into the immigration status of people who were born in this country, that definitely has an impact about whether or not someone feels safe interacting with that government entity in the first place, even if it's a different branch entirely.
Did you want to say something?
Oh, yes. Going off what Ms. Jagger said, I definitely believe young people have blended the idea of entertainment and politics as well. You know, in recent years, obviously, whether you like Trump or not, he does say things that come across as just being, a laugh, just for a laugh. And we've also seen, late night hosts devoted much more of their time to covering politics. And students are going to see this and say, it's a joke, I don't want to be involved in the process, or they're just going to not take what they do seriously and just vote for candidates based on who is the funniest or who's most entertaining.
Blending politics and entertainment is a topic for another panel discussion in itself. That's such a big idea, wow. Let's go, 2 more questions. Dan?
I'm a fan of comparative politics because I think there's a lot we can learn from studying how other democratic countries do things. Just some quick examples. Registration in most democratic countries is automatic. It's the government's responsibility, not the individual's. Voting usually happens on a weekend, not on a Tuesday. Some countries have mandatory voting. I'm not necessarily recommending that, but it's just an interesting point of comparison. In most countries, you have a multi-party system, and you don't have such a big ballot where the voter is so burdened with gathering their own information to make a choice. All they have to really do is understand what the party system is and how they fit into it, and then they just vote by party. So I think there's a lot to learn there, and I guess a question for Ms. Jaggers is comparative politics any part of the curriculum?
I would not it depends on the level that of the class that the student is taking. I would say in an AP government class, there's going to be more of a comparison of our democracy versus, governments around the world, where I would say in an on level, which is more of kind of what we would consider kind of not basic, but more of just general education. It's more going to be just going through the TEKS and making sure students have a general foundation of understanding of what democracy is, what that looks like in society, and then how government how they create policy and what policy looks like domestically and in terms of foreign countries. I would not say that comparatively we spend a lot of time looking at governments around the world.
Any other comments?
Yes. AP offers a comparative government program in class. I personally took that last year and took the test. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that, you know, looking at different countries to see what we can take away from them is a great idea. And specifically with voting, you know, I think there are some, you know, other countries do have higher turnout rates than we do, which is a problem. And yeah, I think it's a decent idea.
A very patient woman.
I was thinking about the whole history of voting in this country and how short it is for women, for minorities. I mean, it's not very many years that we've even had the right to vote, and then I feel like people are like, I don't know if they're taking that right for granted or they don't know the history, and I'm curious how much is it taught? Are they teaching about freedom riders and people who really gave their lives?
Oh, definitely.
But
Civil rights, yeah.
you're saying, and I also want to know if they learned it in
Yes.
school. I mean, really, did any of them hear it? I feel like I
Yeah.
didn't learn it till college.
Well, and it was interesting, Oprah, I saw
yeah,
some
well, that
clips
was
from
part of
her
me
speech,
thinking her
yeah, where
speech,
she
yeah.
mentioned, you know, your ancestors would be ashamed of you not going out and practicing this right, this thing that we fought for in the 50s and 60s, and now you're not taking advantage of it. You know, I think that's the hard, you know, part of teaching government, is really getting students to understand that, you know, 1920 wasn't that far away, you know, and really understanding for women, and even 1964 with the Voting Rights Act, that wasn't that long ago. So I don't think, you know, in the broader picture that they really internalize that to a certain extent, that they really, I think some of them do, but I think a lot of them don't really get that it's, you know, overall, a lot of them haven't had that right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always like to leave, first of all, any other comments?
Yeah, a little, just that I think that actually, they do a tremendous job of teaching that, especially Anderson, actually. But I think that one thing when you talk about young people and voting is that actually our problem isn't a lot of times with some of the groups who got the right to vote recently, with African Americans and with women. Young women vote. Young women vote.
Women vote.
It's young white
Women
men.
seem to have gotten it.
Yeah, young white, Asian, and Hispanic men don't vote. That's our biggest problem, and a lot of those people don't have similar stories at all. I mean, there's definitely some comparisons in the Asian and Hispanic community, but they aren't taught as well either. But actually, young African American people, young women do turn out to vote, and I think some of that can be attributed to the fact that we do a pretty good job of telling them, no, 100 years ago you didn't have this right. You need to exercise it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they still, you know, they're, like you guys were saying, I think that they do still feel marginalized in society.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that they, you know, a lot of young people do understand, young people of color understand that that's their voice, you know, that's their way to express their right.
I definitely believe that in Ms. Jagger's class, we definitely learn about that as a great deal. In recent years, they've taken a more revisionist route of addressing those particular parts of history. You know, a lot of times we just go through like a broad view of American history and don't really stop and look at, you know, how certain groups have been affected, especially in older curriculums. But now, entering the 21st century, we've definitely moved into an area where we do look at how women have gained the right to vote and the struggles that African Americans and Latinos have had to gain the right to vote.
And quick thing, I would like to say that I grew up in a multicultural household, and so it was always brought to my attention that from generations in my family there has been persecution and brutality when it came to African Americans going to the right to vote. From beatings and lynchings and being hosed down and being dragged out of polling facilities. We had to fight for that right. And so have many other minority groups that have to fight and tolerate a lot of ignorance along the way to have that right to vote. And I do see that a lot of students do take it for granted and not actually see that that this fight was worthwhile, because now we have the right to actually change something in our society, in our state, for generations. So I do agree that students do take that, some students do take it for granted, but the majority of students do see the reality when it comes to that fight to vote.
We always like to leave some time at the end so people from the audience can come up and talk to the panel members and can stick around for a few minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up with one question I want a real quick answer, somewhere between 2 words and 2 sentences. Go right down here. The election of 2016, did that really change anything for young people?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
I think it did. I think it's changing the way that young people view what's going on in our society.
Hell yes. It definitely impacted the way, the perception of how, the consequences for not voting, so I'd say.
His answer was mine. But I would say, absolutely, absolutely. 2016 just put the majority of people, and made them woke.
Okay, I want to thank our panel members for coming here.
And before we leave, remember that, and this is for all of you guys as well, Dana de Beauvoir was here about a month ago, and in 2019, we will have new voting machines. So don't get too used to the ones we have now, because there will be a great learning curve for everybody. So stay tuned, stay tuned. And thank you all very much, because there was a lot going on today, and so we appreciate you being here.
This was great.
We will not, so Cindy for a second, but let me say one more thing, and that is that we will not meet again until January 5th. So we take December off because the library does not support having organizations meet in December for obvious reasons. And so we take that time to have our retreat so that we can begin planning what we're going to do, what our focus will be for 2019. So, Cindy.
Well, the person who mentioned the League of Women Voters is gone, so I can't thank him. Thank him in his absentia. The League has gone all out this year in trying to get out information. And one of those answers to those long lines is being prepared with your ballot before you ever walk in the door. And the more people who've got their ideas on who they're going to vote for, who've done their research at their computer or standing there on their phone, the shorter the lines will be on Tuesday. And we've got just a few resources left. I mean, I went somewhere yesterday morning and I was here somewhere this morning, and I know this room has got a lot of advocates in the room for voting. So I've got some wallet cards that have vote411.org on there. You mentioned votetravis.com, it's also on here. Easiest way in the world to prepare to vote is to go to votetravis.com, print out your personalized ballot, the one you're going to see when you walk into the polls, and then go to vote411.org, and you'll get all the information that's in the voter's guide for those candidates, along with their websites, a direct link, so you don't have to search for that. And I've got flyers that also promote that as well, in Spanish and in English. So if anyone wants these remaining precious resources, we did 36,000 of these. And I know for the voting public, that's just a drop in the bucket, but for us, that's a lot of outreach. And 65,000 of the voters' guides that were in the Austin Chronicle, and a few thousand in all the libraries. So.
And let me add to that, because some of the ballots that you print out are generic, and so how do you find out what districts you're in? If you look at your yellow voter registration card, it has all of the districts listed. So then you can go to that sample ballot, you can cross out those positions that you are not eligible to vote for, and then make the selections for those that you are. It makes things a whole lot easier.
If you go to the Travis County website, you can type in your very address, and it gives you your ballot.
It didn't when I was ready to vote.
Okay, it did for me. I was very happy about it.
I was telling my students about the pamphlets and the website for the League of Women Voters, and that's, a lot of people stand in line and look, and some of them were just amazed. What do you mean they wait until the last minute to look? And I was like,
Thank you all. Remember that we have cookies and coffee, as we always do. Please help yourself.
Thank you, you guys are great.
But, yeah, I mean, you go now, you go to that votingtravis.com, and you're